All right, so we'll begin with some introductions. I'm Wendy Stevenson, Vice President Risk Management at Antum Risk. Antum Risk provides a variety of risk management services to the healthcare industry. These include group programs for workers' compensation, professional and general liability, and medical stop loss. We also provide customized consulting solutions to meet your risk management needs. Today, our presenter is going to be Tamara Rodriguez, risk management consultant here at Antum Risk. Before coming to us, Tamara spent 10 years working in both the compliance and the consulting arm of South Carolina OSHA. All right, so Tamara.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This is the last in our series on OSHA for the year. Remember back, we started with record keeping and moved into hazards and what to expect from an OSHA inspection. Then we talked about what to expect after the OSHA inspection. And finally, we're going to cover training. So looking forward to working with all of you today. Our plan for our course is that we're going to talk about when initial OSHA training is required. We're going to review some training requirements for specific standards that apply to a lot of different employers. And then I'm going to show you some free training materials that come from reputable sources to help augment your program. So diving right in, let's talk about our illness and injury prevention program. It would be impossible to have a quality injury and illness prevention program without a strong training and education arm. Employees need to understand the hazards associated with their work, and a knowledgeable employee is a safe employee. My favorite employees are the ones who ask lots of questions. I know sometimes we get defensive about that kind of thing, or that's often people's bend, but if you have an employee who's participating in a training class and they're asking questions, do you feel much more confident that they are retaining information than those who have just sat there mute and expressionless for an hour? You love those engaged employees, and helping expand their safety knowledge is only going to leave you and the company and themselves all in better shape for it. As we go through today, keep in mind that while not all standards require documentation of training, it is in your best interest to do so, for sure. One of the very first questions an investigator will ask in reference to an injurious event was the employee trained? So saying yes is okay. Being able to show where they have signed in for the class and the date and time that they did that is better, right? And while we're at it, since not all standards require proof of comprehension of that training, it's still in your best interest to do so. That same class that I mentioned just a moment ago, where the employee was trained, you're able to show the sign-in sheet, and you're able to show where they passed a competency quiz on the material. We're helping the OSHA investigator understand how seriously we take our safety and health programs here and how invested we are in making sure that our employees have the best understanding that they can of what they are supposed to do. Providing that documentation of comprehension will aid in proving that training program was effective. And then finally, while not all standards that require training also require a written program, it is definitely in your best interest to have one. It's really hard to have consistent training if you don't have a written program or plan that you're basing your training on. If it's not required, if it's not a required program, then maybe just put in a framework, copies of your policies, or it could be a full-blown detailed written program. Format things in the way that fits best for you in the absence of a requirement. But we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Fall protection is a great example of this. I don't have to have a written fall protection program, but I need to make sure that employees who are expected to use a personal fall arrest system know how to do so. As an employer, I should have a written program that at a minimum discusses what is required, gives replacement information, a schedule of when employees are to be trained, things like that, some high points to aid in the development of strong training. So initially, at every work site where there is more than one employee, employees must be trained on the hazards associated with their job or in their environment prior to having the opportunity to encounter them. And as easy and as straightforward as that sounds, you would not believe the number of times I've been on inspection where I ask for somebody, say, HAZCOM training for their cleaning staff. I ask them to show me the employee's HAZCOM training for one of their new employees, and they say, oh, well, it's the 12th, and we do orientation on the 1st and the 15th of the month. The employee just started yesterday, so they're going to attend our safety training on the 15th. And we'll go over all of the information about the chemicals that they use then. That's not okay. That will be a citation, almost certainly, right? We have to have the training before we have the opportunity to encounter the hazard. Bloodborne pathogen training before they can be exposed to contaminated blood. Confined space awareness before we enter the wrong area. And lockout tag out awareness before we try and restart something that has been removed from service. Folks will do all kinds of stuff that they really just have no business doing. I see this stuff on this piece of equipment. I don't know what's going on here. I'm just going to turn it on and get back to my business. Well, that potentially is a lockout tag out issue that you just bypassed and turned something on. If they don't understand what lockout tag out is or looks like, they're going to have a really hard time picking out what they can and cannot do. This is something that we're going to talk about a lot today. We're talking about it several times, so let's go ahead and get it out of the way. You'll see where I discuss in some of the standards where retraining may be due to the demonstration of a lack of knowledge. That's the really nice way of saying it. The less nice, but maybe more straightforward way of saying it is when someone demonstrates their ignorance, you are responsible for helping them learn a better way to do things. So, this is an area where we often tell on ourselves, right? When we demonstrate our ignorance. If an OSHA investigator is there and sees an employee with a strap from their N95 respirator hanging below their neck like a tentacle, that employee has just demonstrated their lack of knowledge. Because is that N95 respirator going to provide a proper seal without both straps being in the appropriate position? Probably not. So that's something that would have to be addressed. Say an investigator sees broken or damaged racks in a storage area. They're going to ask for you to tell them what happened. If you have forklifts in the area, they are probably going to ask to see the training records for your forklift operators, because if the racks weren't damaged in the loading, unloading forklift process, they're going to get credit for having been. So need to make sure that we are really clear about what happened, how it happened, and that we have the training records that show that when employee A accidentally ran into the storage racks while they were trying to unload a pallet, didn't hurt anyone, it just damaged the racks. I have demonstrated my lack of knowledge on how to safely operate that forklift, or I would not have hit those racks. So they will want to see the associated training records with that. Another thing that OSHA investigators will do is look at your injury and illness logs. They're going to look at your 300 and your 300A. They will often see an injury and ask for what would be appropriate training records to positively affect the outcome of the injury. So if I have an employee who got a burn on their hand and I ask what happened, and I understand that they've gotten a chemical on their hand, then I'm going to ask to see the employee's training records for HAZCOM so that I know that they were trained on the PPE requirements associated with the chemicals that they are using. Any questions about retraining due to a demonstration of a lack of knowledge? Basically, when somebody tells on themselves, you need to take them up on their information and offer them some additional help. OSHA has, of course, very specific standards. OSHA.gov provides tons of training resources in a variety of languages that will help with your program. The picture on the left is an actual document that can be downloaded and is broken up by standard. So it will tell you what the training requirements are standard by standard. And it's a pretty helpful spot. The main splash page for training is here on the screen. You'll find it simple OSHA.gov under their training section, and we'll delve into this a lot more in our resources, but just wanted you to see that there are a number of resources available through OSHA.gov itself. But before we get into all of that, we're going to do a brief overview of the training elements for each of these programs today, time willing. We're going to start with hazard communication, move into emergency action plans, personal protective equipment, powered industrial trucks, confined space, lockout tag out, and finally, first aid. In reference to hazard communication, everybody has to know the basics. Everybody has to know the high points, right? I should be able to ask most anybody at your facility questions that relate to items 1 through 6 and get a pretty quick response. Nearly everyone works with some kind of a chemical at work, even sometimes if it's just a simple cleaning product for your office area, or screen cleaners or keyboard cleaners, things like that. Even office-based personnel often work with chemicals in their day, particularly now when we're talking about hand sanitizer, right? One way that I would get at this when I was an investigator is during employee interviews, I would ask the employee to tell me about what job or what task or what chemical that they like working with the least. And we go from there. I'll ask them why they like that the least. Why is that one the one that gives them fits? What kind of PPE do they have to use when they wear it? How often do you use it? Under what circumstances? I'm going to ask all of those kinds of questions. And you see that they're all getting back here. And I would say, so what happens if when you're working with X, it splashes in your eye? What do you do? All of that information is going to be on the safety data sheets. We'll flat out ask, where are your safety data sheets? Often employees can point to a book that is hanging on a wall. They may say, oh, they're in the computer under XYZ place. Everybody should know where your SDSs are and how to gain access to them. Current labeling, do you use the GHS labels that you see in the upper right-hand corner? Do you use your own labels for secondary containers? Is it a mix of the two? Whatever your labeling system is at your organization, your employees should be able to tell me something about it, so that if I see the pictogram located in the center here of the graphic, if I say to them, okay, what does that mean? Employees pretty quickly should be able to tell me that the danger associated with that chemical is that it's flammable. They're going to be able to tell you where chemicals are worked with in their work area. I don't necessarily have to know about the chemicals in someone else's work area, so long as I am not affected by them. But I do need to have some awareness training that they exist. Especially need to know if there's anything I'm working with that doesn't play nicely with what they are working with. Chemicals are not necessarily used in silos. So A plus B may make something really awful. And we need to make sure that employees understand the areas that hazardous chemicals are being used in and how they may affect other things. They should know all of the hazards associated with the chemicals in their work area, of course, and then finally, what personal protective equipment or other measures they should use to help protect themselves. Do they need to turn on an exhaust fan? Do they need to use this product outdoors? Do they need to utilize it in close proximity to the eye wash and shower? Things like that. So it's not just personal protective equipment. That's going to be covered for sure. Need to make sure that they understand what PPE they're expected to be using. But if there's other ways that they can mitigate the hazard, then you want to make sure that employees know the best way to do so. Moving on to emergency action plans. Employees must be designated and trained to assist in a safe and orderly evacuation of other employees. Do you have to train on everything? What goes into your emergency action plan? Well, no, you don't have to train on everything under the sun that could go wrong. You have to train on what is reasonably anticipated. And I think that most of us could agree that it is reasonably anticipated in most areas of the country that we would face an emergency of fire, potentially a tornado, and sadly, an active shooter event at nearly any establishment that you can think of. I would suggest that you start with those three things in your emergency action plan and build up from there as needed based upon the hazards within your environment. These employees have to be trained on your emergency action plan initially, and as the plan or their role within that plan changes. And the standard doesn't come straight out and say, you must train employees on procedures for reporting a fire emergency. Well, how else am I going to understand what I'm responsible for in terms of notifying other employees that I have seen a fire if I'm not trained on the procedures for how to do that? So some implied training elements include procedures for reporting whatever type of emergency that it is, what the evacuation procedures are for a particular type of emergency, including the type of evacuation and the exit route assignments. Shelter-in-place procedures for those employees who must stay behind in order to operate critical elements. Who to contact if I have some questions about the plan. Say you are now a floor marshal for your facility and you are responsible for doing that last sweep of everybody on your floor. Am I responsible for the floor? Am I responsible for just my department? I would think it would be the floor if I've been given floor responsibility, but if I'm confused at all, then I want to make sure that I know what my role is. Say I'm a manager and I work on the second floor, but some of my employees are down on the first floor. Am I responsible for making sure that those employees evacuate in a safe manner, or am I supposed to stick where I am on two? Employees must know the meanings of different signals that are used in alarms. There should be readily identifiable tones that provide information on what the hazard is that you're communicating about. So just a singular fire alarm that only makes one tone may not be adequate, because people, if you pull the fire alarm, come hell or high water, they're going outside. So if the issue is that I have just seen a tornado in the parking lot, maybe I don't want to pull the fire alarm. That's going to send everybody outside. Need to make sure that I notify and know the procedures for reporting a tornado emergency and how those are different from a fire. And as an employee, I need to understand the difference that the signals have between a fire and a tornado. Personal protective equipment. This is a decent illustration about a potentially hazardous activity that is really fun once OSHA has gotten involved. This is a cowboy after OSHA was there. And while it's funny, remember that on our hierarchy of hazard controls, PPE is our very last choice, because it does not do a single thing to correct the hazards in that environment. If the only thing standing between an employee and an injury is a small piece of plastic, a small piece of cloth, etc., we want to be really sure that they know as much about that protective equipment as possible so that they're in the best position to protect themselves. PPE requires that the operator be very consistent in what they do. So, of course, all employees who are required to use PPE have to be trained on a variety of topics that we'll talk about here in just a second. So they have to be trained initially. There are some retraining requirements. If you are talking about respirators, that's an annual retraining. Hearing protective devices, HPDs, that is an annual training requirement. Those folks who demonstrate their lack of understanding. And anytime we make some changes in the workplace or the equipment that render the previous training obsolete. Changing in the workplace equipment or process can really affect the different types of PPE that are used. For example, simple change in a chemical from brand A's degreaser to brand B's degreaser may require a completely different kind of personal protective equipment. So make sure that everything is matchy-matchy. During an inspection, I took a pH sample of a degreaser that was being used that literally had a pH of 1. When I asked about it, the employer did not have the safety data sheet, and the employee was not wearing the right kind of gloves, and there wasn't an eye wash and shower associated located close enough to the associated employee to provide adequate access. And they said, oh, well, this isn't our normal degreaser. We usually get product A, but our supplier was out, so they sent us product B. And we're using the same thing in the same way for the same process. Well, the difference was in the two chemicals. The chemical that they were used to working with had a pH of 6. That is extremely different from a product that has a pH of 1. So as chemicals change, as processes change, we need to make sure that our training is moving along as well. We have to provide training on when that PPE is necessary, what PPE should be used, how to properly put it on, take it off, adjust it, and wear it. Be very clear on what the limitations are of their personal protective equipment. There is a big difference between nitrile gloves and butyl gloves and what they can handle. So make sure that employees know that. Respirators is another example of that. Respirators have a finite life to them. They need to understand how long that respiratory protection device can protect them for. And of course, they need to understand how to take care of, maintain, and the useful life of disposable PPE. Last year, due to shortages, a lot of our healthcare providers were needing to wear N95 respirators for much longer than they should and would normally be wearing a respirator. Hopefully that has shifted back for everyone and we can use them in the way that they were intended. But we need to make sure that everybody knows, as appropriate, that this crisis has passed at our particular location and that they should, again, go ahead and start throwing those away every shift, every day, whatever basis is normal for their operation. That we don't need to necessarily hang on to these super tight like we did a year ago. And employees must demonstrate their understanding of the training. If it's a respirator, have them put it on and take it off. Perform a seal check. If I'm giving an employee hearing protection, I want to watch them put it in and I want to watch them take it out. So I make sure that they are doing it the right way. So again, demonstration of their understanding of the training is key and will be very helpful for you as an employer as you move forward with your program. Moving into respiratory protection, of course, all are required to be trained before they are required to wear that respirator. Training has to occur initially, of course, annually. Anytime after that, an employee demonstrates their lack of understanding, and anytime we have a change in the workplace or type of respirator being used. So it's not necessarily I'm going from a 3M N95 to a Moldex N95 where we would necessarily need to do retraining because that's the same type of respirator. Now, if I were changing from a disposable 3M to a PAPR, now we're going to have some additional respiratory protection training because I am using a completely different type of respirator. Employees have to demonstrate their understanding of all of these elements. And this is again why personal protective equipment is our last choice when it comes to hazard protection. Look at all of these things that an employee has to remember every single time they use that piece of PPE. So if we can address it through some of the other hierarchy of hazard control areas, like engineer it out or administrative control it out, then that's definitely what we want to do. Got to really make sure that employees understand why the respirator is necessary. Make the case for the buy-in. Be enthusiastic about it. Make sure that people understand what is going on and why they have to wear it, where they have to wear that respirator. It's really important to get that buy-in up front as much as possible. Keep a copy of the training that they receive in a central place, maybe with a copy of the master copy of your written respiratory protection program. Again, this is just another tool that you have to substantiate what training an employee received, on what basis, and what content was covered. So keep a copy of that training somewhere safe. Moving forward to powered industrial trucks. Powered industrial trucks, including powered pallet jacks. It's not just for forklifts. Powered pallet jacks are very common and do fall under this category. And there's three big elements to it. First, you have to have a lecture or some type of formal instruction. It could be computer-based, that's fine. It can be a videotape, that's fine. Written program that the employee is responsible for reading is okay. I will tell you, it meets the standard, but is it necessarily the best way to train somebody? Probably not. Not everybody reads at the same level. Not everybody comprehends information in the same way. So we want to be sure that we have a good method of delivery for the target audience. I have to do a practical exercise. I have to show my trainer that I know what I'm doing. Additionally, I have to be evaluated by that same trainer while I'm performing my exercises. Did I do a good job? Did I need to change something about how I performed? We have to do refresher training at least every 3 years, but why might I need to do it before the 3-year mark? Well, probably because of a demonstration of my ignorance. If you see me overloading a pallet jack, I might need retraining. If you see that I have flipped a pallet jack, I might need retraining. If you see me riding a powered pallet jack, I might need retraining. We see where I'm going with this, right? If you see somebody operating a powered industrial truck in an unsafe way, they have just demonstrated their lack of comprehension. So they're going to get the information again. The program training content has to be both general overarching information about this type of powered industrial truck and site specific, as in this is the forklift we use. So we need to go over the operating instructions, warning, precautions, the differences between whatever this powered industrial truck is and a regular automobile, where the controls and instrumentation are located, how they function, and what they are designed to do, how the engine or the motor operate. I don't need to be a mechanic. I don't need to be able to fix it, but I do need to know what type of motor it is. I need to make sure that I understand how to steer and move and set a parking brake. I need to make sure that I understand any kind of fork or attachment adaptation that I am allowed to do and that is appropriate for the task that I will be doing. Additionally, I need to know how much my powered industrial truck can hold. What is the stability of loading it in different ways? When I have to inspect it and how that inspection is going to be performed. There's a lot of manufacturing facilities now that have a device on their forklifts that the operator, every time they sit down in the seat, has to go through a series of questions on a little handheld pad that connects to the forklift that goes through their safety checklist. And then they submit it. So EHS always has a record of that forklift inspection having been done. They know the employees are doing them. They know the status of their forklifts. They know all of that kind of stuff. So making sure that employees understand what their responsibilities are in reference to inspection and maintenance is important. How do we refuel it? Am I expected to recharge batteries? If so, do I have to add water to those batteries? Now we've just jumped back to our hazard communication program, right? Because I am potentially exposed to battery acid when I'm adding water to forklift batteries. We need to make sure we understand our operating limitations, any warnings, instructions, or precautions listed in the manual. So somebody in the comments for me, please tell me what topic this employee needs to redo for his training. Okay, so that gentleman has clearly missed something. Does anybody happen to know what topic that this person may have missed or need to go over again in order to safely operate this truck? Can anybody tell me? Very good, Crystal White. How much weight the truck can handle, the capacity. Clearly, this person did not understand the capacity limits of the forklift that they were using. Additionally, an argument could be made that they didn't understand the loading techniques that were appropriate for this type of lift. So excellent work, Crystal. You're exactly right. Powered industrial truck certification is forklift training, excuse me, is one of those trainings where it is quote unquote certified. There is no such thing as a forklift license, but this is what most people who refer to forklift licenses are talking about. There is no requirement that a forklift operator carry their certification on them. It is fine to keep that with their other personnel or training records. It does have to include the name of the person who was certified, the date of the training, the date of the evaluation, and the identity of the people who provided that training and or evaluation. So some specific information has to be there, but we don't have to carry it all the time. Pop quiz. So this is Andy. Andy drove forklifts in the Navy for 25 years. He retired from the Navy, still has and was able to give you all of his Navy forklift certification documents. And he got a new job at the hospital that requires forklift driving as part of his normal job duties. What do you think? Does Andy need to be given forklift training by his new employer? You guys can go ahead and answer in the comments with yeses or nos. Do you thumbs up, thumbs down? Does he need retraining or does he not need retraining? Crystal says yes. Right, a few responses. Very good. Virginia says yes. Well, the OSHA answer always, right, is it depends. So it's a little bit of a trick question. It does depend, but here's what it depends on. It depends on if the Navy training is appropriate for the truck and the working conditions at the hospital, and he is evaluated as being a competent forklift driver by the hospital, then no, he does not need to be retrained. It's got to be like in kind though. Andy's experience has to be with driving our model and type of forklift. Need to make sure that that is matching. And I still have to do the element where I evaluate Andy's demonstration of his knowledge. I still have to watch him do the course, whatever the course is that we've set up. But that doesn't mean that he has to sit down for the classroom portion. If the training wasn't appropriate for either elements at the hospital, or he is evaluated as, or he is not evaluated as being a competent forklift driver by the hospital, in that either he makes mistakes or that evaluation isn't done at the hospital, then yes, he will have to have complete retraining. Either way, he has to be evaluated by the hospital and determined to be competent. Confined space training. This is a hospital rotoclave. Hospitals do have a number of confined spaces in them. Our training should be for everyone who are working around spaces. Everybody needs to know where our confined spaces are and what our responsibilities are with them. Often it is nothing, but we need to at least know where they are and that I should stay out. If I am required to go into confined spaces, I of course have to have additional training prior to my assignments on the entry team. Anytime my job duties change for confined space entry, this time I'm the entrant instead of being the attendant, things like that. Need to make sure that my training is up to par. If we've introduced a new hazard into the space, I want to be sure of what that information is. And any deviation or inadequacies in an employee's knowledge or their use of these procedures. So if an employee is inside of a confined space and the attendant says, I need you to get out of the space, and the employee refuses, for whatever reason the employee has refused. Oh, I'm almost done. Oh, it'll only take me a second to finish this. Oh, I need to grab my tools. No, I just don't want to leave the space right now. Whatever the reason is, the attendant has told the entrant to leave. The entrant has not done so. That is an inadequacy in the employee's knowledge and a deviation from the accepted procedures. Quote unquote certified training is required for anybody working in the spaces, attendants, entrants, supervisors. That has to include the name of the employee's signature or initials of the trainers, the dates of the training, and I would suggest that you keep a copy of what was covered in the training class. We're going to finish up with our topics today in reference to first aid training. I've been to lots of facilities that were missing required training, hazard communication training or lockout tag out training for key employees, but it had provided first aid training to everyone. There's so few industries that require first aid training. It's literally those 4 that are on the screen. First aid training is also required by 2 separate standards in a more general way. Both 1910 151B and 1926 50C and D1 all cover first aid responsibilities. The general industry standard 151B says that if we are not in near proximity, which is 3 to 4 minutes from anything other than offices, for offices only, you can get 15 minutes, to the workplace which is used for the treatment of all employees, a person shall be adequately trained to render first aid. So adequately trained means the American Red Cross, American Heart Association, or the National Safety Course is considered adequately trained. So if my work site is more than 4 minutes away from a place where I would send my employees to get emergency care, then I'm going to need to have some in-house first aid. Similar language in the construction standard, and same information in reference to reasonable access. 3 to 4 minutes of the site or 15 minutes for offices where serious injuries are not likely. Training information, the minimum level is the American Red Cross standard course. It should cover site-specific, reasonably anticipated injuries. Should cover CPR. Look, notice that I did not say must for either of those. Is required to have retraining every 3 years. That's what's required by the American Red Cross. If we're doing the CPR element, that element comes into play for retraining every year. And I don't know if anybody's ever looked it up, but our CPR survival rates as compared to Europe and other areas of the world is pretty abysmal. We have a lot of work to do in order to be effective in CPR. Lockout Tag Out, just to go over it briefly, I'm so sorry, I forgot that we had this last bit. Lockout Tag Out, all employees who are authorized or affected by Lockout Tag Out have to be trained on the Lockout Tag Out program. We have to be retrained if the procedures change or I demonstrate that I don't know what I'm doing, meaning that I turn something on that shouldn't be, I remove a lock when I shouldn't, or otherwise tamper with the process. And as an employer, I have to certify that the training was done and is being kept up to date. There's no annual requirement for Lockout Tag Out. Certification of that training has to include the employee's name and the dates of that training. Again, I would encourage you to keep a copy of the information that was provided to the employee during the training so that everybody's on the same page about what's covered. We have to give them information on the purpose and functioning of Lockout Tag Out, how to recognize the different types of energy sources that you have at your facility and how to control or isolate those, and the purpose and use of machine-specific procedures that are going to be involved in Lockout Tag Out. Affected personnel have to be provided training on procedures that they may see use. So I just need to understand that when I see a lock on a piece of equipment, that means I don't touch it, kind of thing. This is the level. And the prohibition relating to the restart of equipment while under Lockout Tag Out. Ideally, if Lockout Tag Out is done properly, this should be a non-issue. But if it's not done properly, an operator may have the ability to restart that piece of equipment without the person performing the work knowing. Any questions about the different training areas that we have discussed this morning? You're welcome to write things in the chat. Any questions about the training program content for those particular areas? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and continue forward, and let's talk about some free training resources that are really wonderful and very helpful. There, of course, is tons of information on the internet, so how do you, as a safety person, pick out the good stuff from the bad stuff? Well, here's at least 5 separate sites that all have the good stuff. Stuff that is correct, is up to date, is comprehensive, and is engaging in different ways. So we're going to start with OSHA.gov. I opened that page for you a little bit earlier, but here's the main training page. And if you come to training requirements and resources, you will see that you get to the training and reference materials library. I love this because it's broken down by topic. So if I'm working in nursing homes and I want to understand what training material I might need to see since I work in a nursing home, I can do the drop down to nursing homes, hit go, and it will literally take me to that information. Give me additional resources that are available in reference to it. It's a really terrific resource. After that, we have ELCOSH, which is the Electronic Library of Construction, Occupational Safety, and Health. They have some webinars that require payment, and then there's others that don't. Toolbox talks are great ways to engage with employees in microdoses to get everybody on the same page in reference to safety and thinking about safety. All kinds of information about training materials. When you go to the search results, all you have to do is click on the topic and it will take you to what they have in reference to that particular item. So that's another wonderful resource. The Board of Certified Safety Professionals on their foundation website, they have a variety of training resources that are available. These you'll find, strangely enough, under the career development section, but if you look, they are related to safety in large part, and most of these are free, and you can see that they're on demand. So that's another great resource. One of my favorites is the North Carolina Department of Labor, surprisingly enough, for a government agency. I know so many people give government agencies a hard time, but North Carolina, OSHA, and their Department of Labor has done a really great job of developing this website and giving you access to all of it. You can literally borrow from their DVD library if you need to. They'll send it to you. Streaming content for free. They'll give you free PowerPoint presentations. You can go to see them for some of the training classes that they provide, both in person and, of course, virtually. This is a terrific place to go for additional information and training programs. And finally, we're going to jump across our northern border and go to WorkSafe BC, which stands for WorkSafe British Columbia. So keep in mind that they may have different standards than what we have. Where I have most frequently used these is in reference to standards that I know we have a lot in common. For example, confined space. So if I'm interested in confined space, I know, just because I go through to BC, WorkSafe BC a lot, that under confined space, they have a video that is terrific. So here's all kinds of information on confined space and all kinds of information about what their standards require. But as you go down, you'll see they have some information available in a book. Again, be careful, compare their standard to ours to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. But these videos are terrific. Precious Time, the Cody McNulty story, if you haven't had a chance to watch it, you definitely should. And anybody who goes into confined spaces should watch what Cody has to say. It's really fascinating. But this is another spot that has great resources that are available all the time, on demand, and for free, which is pretty terrific. So they even, on WorkSafe BC, they actually link to our OSHA standards as well, and our NIOSH standards. How great are they? So those are all free training resources that are available for you. If you have any additional free training resources that you'd like to share with the group, let them know. Please feel free to drop that in the comments. The more we can learn, the more we grow together, and that is terrific. And at this time, what I'm going to do is open it up for any questions that you may have. You are welcome to unmute yourself and ask, or raise a hand and ask. Either one is absolutely fine.
So we did have one question, Tamara, quickly, that someone had some questions about the forklifts, and I did try to answer the question to let them know that there was a table on the different types of forklifts.
Yeah.
In the standard, but so the question was, are all forklifts universal? Are there typically different ones used, say, in your example, the military versus a hospital?
It's entirely dependent on the environment. The classifications of forklifts are usually in reference to the environment. So in my military example, if I'm working around things that are explosive or combustibles, then I'm going to make sure that I have a forklift that is approved for that kind of environment. So it may not be matchy-matchy. They may be different. It's entirely possible.
Great, thank you. So still, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in. While you're doing that, I wanted to let you know that there is an evaluation form or a survey on SurveyMonkey. Janine has posted that into the chat. So you can go ahead and start taking that survey. Let us know how we did. Don't see any additional questions right now. Is there anything else we want to highlight real quick before we finish up?
Well, if you're in South Carolina OSHA, they still have not come out with our infectious disease emergency temporary standard. So be on the lookout for that. Everywhere else that's under federal jurisdiction, good luck. Our next webinar will be in January. And as we typically do in January, we will focus on OSHA record keeping. And we'd love to hear from you what classes, subjects that you think would be useful for you, where you work in your environment. that might have a broad appeal to folks so that we can train as many people as possible. We like to open this to free resource to as many people as we can, and we enjoy your participation. So if you can think of topics, either include them in your survey response or in the comments, or you are welcome to send us an email. Our information is right here.
All right, well, with that being said, it looks like everyone who had a question had an opportunity to ask it, at least at this time. So Tamara, I'm going to say we have finished everything up. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. Please complete your survey. And again, if you need any additional resources or potential resources, don't hesitate to get in touch with us.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.